Hey everyone, this is Jono, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about stress and burnout. What is it? What causes it? And how do we deal with it? Let's do it. Alrighty, welcome my friends. It's great to have you here. Hope you're all safe and well wherever you may be. Now, as usual, if you want to stay up to date with the very best in how to build amazing communities and teams, be sure to hit that subscribe button and of course tap that little notification bell to be informed of new videos. Now, I'm going to be talking about this, stress and burnout, in this video. Now, this is something that is really important because it impacts everybody. We all experience stress in varying degrees at different points of our lives. And sadly, many people will experience burnout, and I certainly have experienced it, and I'm going to talk about that in this video too. And my goal with this video is to walk through what stress and burnout is, what are the symptoms of it, and then how do you manage it in yourself as well as your colleagues, your family members, your community members, and elsewhere, okay? Now, this is one video of a few videos I've done about what I call the community challenges triangle, and this is three areas that tend to affect most communities and most businesses at some point. And this is sized appropriately, right? So at the top, you've got crisis management. This is pretty rare that you tend to need to dig into this, but what is more common is conflict resolution, okay? This is where, members of your community, of your business just don't get on very well, and you need to deal with how to resolve that. But by far the most common element here is stress and burnout, and that's what we're digging into in this video. And like I say, this really impacts everybody. So I think many of you will be able to find this video pretty useful for a broad variety of different settings. Now, I do want to make a very, very clear caveat here, okay? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist, right? I don't look, sound, or have the experience of a doctor or a psychologist. I'm going to be dispensing some experience and some recommendations here, but you should always seek the counsel of a medical professional for how this should apply to you and your loved ones and your colleagues, okay? So let's just be clear on this, right? Don't listen to random, extremely handsome people on the internet, of course. Talk to your doctor if you want to apply some of this and make sure that it's right for you. All right. So I first heard about burnout a little while back when I was working at Canonical. It was kind of like 2007, 2008. I was working on the Ubuntu project, and I just didn't feel myself. Like, I'm a pretty positive, happy-go-lucky, optimistic kind of guy. I've got some great friends. I love my team. I was very happy in the work that I was doing, but I just didn't feel very good. I was tired. I was not motivated. I was being lazy at work. I was skipping elements of work, and it didn't really dawn on me until one member of my team came up to me and said, "You know what, Jono? Is everything okay? Because you're being really kind of ratty with people. You're being pretty direct." And he actually was blunt about it. He said, "Look, you're being a bit of a dick to people, okay?" And I was mortified. I was like, I didn't realize that I was behaving this way. And he, with the kind person that he is, he said, "Is everything okay at home?" and all the rest of it. And around that time, I'd broken up with my girlfriend a little while previously. But, her and I got on very well, and I was still adjusting to kind of living by myself, I think. This is certainly no fault of hers because I broke up with her. It was my decision to end the relationship. But I thought, well, maybe that's something to do with it. So I started doing a little bit of digging on the internet, and that's when I discovered about burnout. Now, effectively, we all know what stress is, right? Stress is when you feel anxious, when you feel frustrated, when you feel tense, like there's a coiled spring in your body that tenses up. And the aggregation of that, when you have stress layered on stress, layered on stress, layered on stress, is what can cause burnout. And burnout is essentially where it turns into a longer episode of stress. And I didn't really know what this was, but when I looked online about this and found some web pages about this, it started being clear to me that I think I was experiencing this. Now, I didn't really look into how to deal with this, but what I did do is I decided to go and visit a friend of mine. She lives in Ireland. I went over and hung out with her for like 4 or 5 days, and we had a great time. Didn't take a laptop with me or anything like that. And I just needed that time away, and it really helped me to decompress. And I came back fresher, ready to get back to normal. And that was great. Now, one thing I want to make very, very clear is that getting away is going to be something I'm going to talk about as a means to deal with burnout. But not everybody experiences it the same way. For me, go away for 4 or 5 days was great. But for some people, dealing with burnout can take months. It can even take years, okay? So everybody is going to be a little bit different. Now, it wasn't until I wrote The Art of Community back in 2007, 2008, where I wanted to write about my experience with burnout in the book, that I discovered this magazine. This is Scientific American Mind, and there was an article in there about burnout. And essentially 2 psychologists had created something called the burnout cycle. And this is essentially 12 stages that people tend to go through when they're in the process of burning out one by one. And one of the things that they made very, very clear was that not everybody hits every single stage. Stage 1 is kind of, you're a little bit annoyed with your dog, and stage 12 is, suicide, basically. And it progressively gets worse. But one of the things they made very clear in the study is that not everybody will hit every single stage. And that sometimes people will hit these different stages in different orders, okay? So what I wanted to do in this video was to kind of go through this, but 12 stages is kind of a lot to get through. So what I want to do instead is I've kind of summarized this down into 6 stages, which gives you a general gist of this. I think this will be a little bit easier to understand, but if you want to go and find out more about this, do a search online for the burnout cycle and you'll be able to go and find it, okay? So the first stage typically is a level of insecurity and proof. And what I mean by this, and as I go through this, when you think about your experience of burnout, think about how much what I'm sharing here applies to you. And if you feel comfortable sharing that in the comments, I'd love to see that. If you don't feel comfortable sharing it, that's totally fine. But I always love a relationship with my viewers. So feel free to talk about what you're hearing in this video, what this means, ask any questions. I always try to answer as many questions as possible, but let's try and make this as interactive as possible if you feel comfortable with it. So the first stage is always insecurity and proof. And what this means is when you start burning out, you feel like you don't measure up, right? You feel insecure about whether you're any good, whether you bring in value. Sometimes people will feel, like they don't deserve their job, or that their friends may feel like they're better than they actually are. There's another kind of condition called imposter syndrome that can often happen at this point, which is where you feel like you're an imposter, that you're actually not very good at what you do, and everybody thinks you're really good at what you do, and it's only a matter of time before you get rumbled. That can often happen. I know many people experience that. I've certainly experienced that, and certainly continue to experience that from time to time. So you tend to feel this general level of kind of insecurity. And for a lot of people, I think especially people who are very, very active and opinionated about their careers and what they want to do, the way in which we deal with deficits, like feeling of insecurity, is you have a reactive motion, right? You do something to deal with that. You don't just kind of sit back and let it fly. For many people, they'll figure out a way of doing something about it. So they'll typically feel like they need to prove themselves that they are actually not what their fear says they are, right? So you may think, oh, God, I'm just not very good at what I do. It's only a matter of time before people find this out. And, so you feel like I need to prove to people that I'm actually really good at what I do, and, that I can deliver great results, and I am a good community leader, or I'm a good business leader, or whatever it might be. Now, typically the response to this kind of insecurity and urge to prove yourself is that people will just tend to work harder. Stay a little bit longer at the office, and maybe get up a little bit earlier in the morning, be checking your phone and your email in the evenings, and maybe before you go to bed, and trying to work a little bit at weekends, or checking in on your work, at social events and things like that. There's kind of like this urge to really, again, prove yourself and to deal with that insecurity by applying more time at work, more hours at work. And, there's kind of like that whole leadership cliche that it's not about working longer, it's about working smarter. And I absolutely believe that. I think there is an outdated view in the world that we need to live at our workplaces. I think I work a lot. I work all day, and when our son goes to bed, I work most of the evening as well. But I don't do it because I have to. I do it because I love it, right? But I think a lot of people do it because they feel they need to do it. And when you're burning out, in many cases, people are thinking, I don't really want to be at work, but I feel like I need to do this because I want to be able to prove that, I'm worth it, that I'm worth the role and the reputation and all those different pieces. And the challenge, of course, was when you work harder and you apply more time into it, is that you're taking time away from other things, right? You're taking time away from your friends, from your family. You're taking time away from your hobbies and your social activities. And what that does is that can kind of add to the stress, because when we take time away from our work, it provides an opportunity for us to rest and recharge. Often when people are at this phase, they're kind of not getting a huge amount of sleep, or when they are going to bed, their sleep is somewhat disrupted. They're probably dreaming about this because they're stressed. Maybe they're going to be experiencing some sleep-related issues. Like, for example, when I get stressed, I talk in my sleep, right? And I sleepwalk sometimes. And, that really annoys my wife waffling on in my sleep. And I'm aware of that. And that adds another layer of stress, okay? So this working harder, this is again where it becomes like this kind of cycle. You work more, you try to prove yourself, you don't feel like you're kicking that insecurity, so you work even more. Now, there are two other elements that kind of fit into this phase as well. One is that people who are burning out will often point to other people as being a source of problems. Like, my team isn't doing the work that they asked them to do, or my boss doesn't understand, the pressure that I'm under, or I don't have the tools and resources that I need to be successful, those kinds of things. And then the second element that kind of feeds into this phase as well is often a sense that, I'm just going through a rough patch. That this is just a really busy time, right? Because there's this culture, especially in technology, of, you go up and you say to anyone, like, how are things going? And everybody says, busy. And not everybody can be possibly busy all of the time. It's just a kind of a culture of, like, we feel like we need to say that in many ways. So I think in many ways it justifies when people are burning out saying, I'm just going through like a busy patch. Like, there's just kind of a lot on my plate right now, and that it will ultimately pass. And that's a bit of a dangerous position to be in, because it kind of justifies the stress that they're under, as opposed to saying, should I be under this kind of stress, and what do I need to do to kind of get a healthy balance, okay? So what's happening at this phase is that, people are working harder to try to prove themselves, to deal with that insecurity. The insecurity doesn't often get dealt with, so they continue to prove themselves and work harder and harder and harder. And what this can result in is that they don't take care of themselves. This is usually when people will start resorting to just getting fast food and not exercising as much, and sometimes not getting enough sleep, or sometimes resorting to booze and to drugs, and to elements such as that. And as you can probably imagine, and this again gets into this like cycle, that, this vicious cycle, or this vicious circle, is that doesn't help with the situation. If you're already working all of the time, you're not getting a lot of rest because you're not getting, to unwind with your hobbies and your friends and your family and whatever else. And then you start, you start applying fast food, and you're not exercising enough, and you're not getting enough fresh air. This all makes it worse. And what can typically happen at this phase as well is that people start kind of pulling back a little bit, right? There'll usually be an excuse like, oh no, I can't come out and hang out tonight because I've just kind of got a lot on right now. Or, we're going to be busy this weekend. We can't hang out with our friends because, blah, blah, blah's got to work. Like, Jono's got to work because he's really busy. Little, relatively lightweight, often not particularly serious excuses, or seemingly serious excuses, will be shared to justify spending more time working and dealing with this than time away. Because sometimes I think when we are at our most stressed, when we are dealing with the most difficult challenges, it's completely unintuitive to say spending time away from that is actually going to help, right? And it's taken me years. It took me probably 25 years to realize that when I'm most stressed, what I need to do is I need to not look at the thing that's stressing me out. So what will then typically happen as the next phase is that they're constantly focusing on relief and the rejection of other people. It becomes much more serious. There is a desire to just make this stress, this anxiety go away, right? And this is typically when the darker elements of burnout really start manifesting. People will be drinking a lot of alcohol. They'll be taking illegal drugs. Sometimes people have demonstrated kind of bizarre sexual experiences and practices, like maybe people are going to see prostitutes, for example, as a means to just get a little bit of like relief away from it all. Like, there's almost a desperation is really starting to set in here. And also there's a much more intense level of rejection, like pushing people away who are trying to help. Usually at this kind of phase of the burnout cycle, you'll get family members and friends will be really kind of expressing a lot of concern about the individual who's burning out and kind of reaching out. And often they'll be pretty hostile and say, look, I'm completely fine. Stop meddling. I just need to get through this. I'm going to be okay. Okay? Whereas in reality, they're not okay. They're really kind of in the throes of burnout, and that's when they need their friends the most. This is an impossibly difficult situation for a lot of friends and family members who are trying to help somebody who's dealing with burnout. So this is when things really start getting kind of serious and frankly a little bit depressing as I go through this in this video, is that now what's happening is the cycle is more intense than ever before, right? That compulsion to work, that compulsion to prove themselves has gone from being a desire to a desperation. Like I have to show the world that I've got this value, that I can make this work. And if I need to go away and get drunk at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, then so be it. That's sadly what some of the rationale that we'll sometimes see in some more extreme cases. So what then happens, right, is we'll start seeing maybe some withdrawal. People kind of really taking a step back. And this is when the attempts from family members, from friends to try and help and play a role in helping those people to kind of deal with it, will step even further back. This is often when people will withdraw from social media networks, from family gatherings, from social gatherings. Sometimes people won't even go to work at this point, and they'll ask if they can work from home, so they can avoid those interferences as they may see them, to try and take that they may see as taking them away from demonstrating themselves and getting through this time that they're justifying as this is just a blip. Like I just need to deal with this. And then sadly, the final stage here is typically just outright depression, right? It's in the more extreme cases, this is when people can start having suicidal thoughts and they can start self-harming and things like that. And it goes without saying, if you have ever experienced anything along those lines, please, please, please talk to someone who can help. I personally have never experienced that before, and I would never even profess to try and understand what it feels like. I just, I think it would be condescending to even attempt to try and understand what that feels like. But what I do know from people who've been through, that kind of depression or even those kind of like suicidal episodes, is that people who've got through it have said, like, I needed to talk to someone. I needed to get off my chest. So if you're experiencing that, or if you've had experienced that, or if in the future you do, please go and get some help, okay? So that's typically the overall kind of cycle. And as you can tell, what happens is it builds and it builds and it builds, and it starts relatively benign at the beginning, and then gradually it gets more and more serious because getting away from it can be more and more difficult, okay? So what I want to cap this video off with is kind of how we go about managing this. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to go through the symptoms is because I think knowing what to look out for is in many ways a big chunk of the battle. When I have talked about this previously, like I did a whole bunch of talks at conferences about what I'd learned from this, from burnout. And a ton of people came up to me and said, you know what? I had no idea that was happening to me. And now I know that I need to go and get some help and deal with it. I actually had one person come up to me and tell me that the talk saved their life. He said to me that he was kind of experiencing some suicidal thoughts. And, when I walked through the session at a conference, he said it made him realize it's not just him. Like, this is something that does impact other people, and there is a way forward. There is a solution. There is a way to feel better and to get better when it comes to this. So I just want to talk through some approaches, some techniques I've seen in dealing with burnout, both in ourselves as well as other people. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a place to get started, because I think if this is interesting to you, you might want to go and do a bunch of digging on the internet. There's books out there about burnout that I'd definitely recommend, but this is a good place to start. The first one is it's very simple. It's I've got your back. I've met a lot of people over the years who've experienced burnout, a lot of friends of mine who've experienced burnout. And I think just going up to someone and saying, look, you know what? I know you're having a bit of a tough time right now, and I'm here as a friend. We often have our friends say this to us, but I think when you go up to someone and say, look, I'm serious, like is everything okay? Like, I want to be helpful. Like, making it clear that you're not a nuisance if you go and talk to someone about this kind of stuff is super important. I think this is especially important if you're a manager and a member of your team's burning out. A line that I will always say, and it's not meant as a line this is not a fakery, is I will often say to people, I'm going to talk to you now as, let's say, a consultant when I'm talking to clients. And then I'll often say, but now I'm going to talk to you as a friend. And I'll make it very clear that I'm wearing two different hats. And I think that's an important way of then removing the fear of talking about personal things in a work context, which I think some people are worried that may reflect on them poorly. There may be a performance improvement plan as a result of this. I think some people are worried about talking about this stuff because they worry it's going to get them into hot water with their job, which is the last thing they need when they're burning out. So going up to someone and saying, like, I'm here to help, just as a friend, like, what can I do to help? The second thing is to share in the problem solving. So for example, a friend of mine, she was burning out, and I went up to her and I said, look, I don't want to be presumptuous, and I'm speaking as a friend here, but I think you may be burning out, and I experienced this a while back, and I just want to be here and helpful. And she said, well, I don't think I'm burning out, I'm just going through a rough patch. And I said, well, one of the things I discovered when I was burning out was I felt this kind of urge to prove myself. And I was just wondering if you were experiencing that. And it turned out that she was. What she shared with me was that her boss she didn't get on very well with her boss. It sounded like he was, frankly, a bit of a dick. And, there were some unclear expectations. She wasn't sure whether she was going to get a bonus at the end of the year, which she was depending on for some medical bills that she wanted to pay for her sister who was having some medical issues. So there was a lot kind of riding on this. So I said to her, like, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we go and grab a coffee or lunch and just let's figure out a battle plan? Let's, tell me everything that's going on, and then we can figure out a way in which we can solve this together, and I'll just share some ideas. And what I did there was I didn't tell her what to do. I just said, well, maybe you could think about this, or maybe you could think about this. And then ultimately, what happens is she felt more and more comfortable in my counsel as a friend, and then she started feeling like this was a problem that was halved, and I think that was very, very helpful. And eventually, it took a little while, but she got through it. And now, interestingly, when she sees other people with burnout, she goes and helps them. It's kind of like has this knock-on effect. I think what's also important, I kind of illustrated this at the beginning of this video, was when I experienced burnout the first time, and I've burnt out a few times, I knew I needed to take a breather. Like I needed to take some time away. And, I used the example of me going to Ireland to see my friend. What I've discovered from this is that when I'm burning out, when it happens from time to time, I've discovered that now I know what burnout is. I can detect it in myself much earlier. So sometimes if I feel like I'm burning out, I will just go and take some time off. Now I'm very fortunate because I run my own business. If I need to take a couple of days off, I'll just take a couple of days off. There are some companies where you'll have like mental health days, or you can use your PTO for this. But I would definitely recommend, if you're experiencing burnout or if somebody else is, just getting away from it is really important. The tricky thing here is some people really struggle with, not checking in. They use checking in as an excuse to stay working. So they're constantly checking their phone and all the rest of it. So you've kind of got to go and say, like, turn off your email, set the expectation that there won't be any phone calls. I'm going to take some time away. And even if that's just laying in bed watching Netflix, so be it. I mean, I would personally recommend that time is getting exercise and cooking and eating and kind of reinvigorating your body. Your body is like it's a battery that needs recharging, right? But focus on that. But taking a breather, I think, is really important. Sometimes when I've been burning out a little bit, just taking a breather for half a day can help, or just, a couple of hours can help. Everybody's different. It depends on how much you're burning out. And I think taking time away so when you come back refreshed, then it really helps. And then the other thing here as well, I think, is really checking in on people. My example that I gave earlier on of my friend who was not getting on very well with her boss, once we kind of sat down and we talked about like what her experience was, and I wasn't trying to be pushy or trying to, dictate or force her into a box. It needed to feel complementary to her thinking. I just check in on her and just see how she was doing. And this is really important because you want someone checking in and saying, hey, how's everything going? But you don't want somebody who's going to be hassling you over and over again. Like, what I shouldn't have done was, be messaging her every hour or every day and saying, like, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Because that's overwhelming. So what I did is I just checked in every couple of days and just said, how's everything going? I'm always here to help if there's anything else you need. And then she knew that the door was open, but she had someone who she felt like she could talk to. And then the final one here, and I just want to kind of cap off this video, is to provide what I call a Stoic toolbox. So I'm a big fan of this philosophy called Stoicism. This is where you essentially are able to train your brain into more effectively dealing with really difficult situations. So the example I often give is, imagine you go into a meeting with your boss, right? And it doesn't go well. Boss is unhappy. When you're getting that critical feedback, sometimes you can feel like coiled spring. And in some people, it's a reactive spring. Like you want to say something, you want to set the record straight, you want to tell them that, they're wrong. And sometimes people can say stupid things in those kinds of situations. And Stoicism essentially trains your brain to say, okay, I'm in this awkward, uncomfortable situation, but what do I want to accomplish? Like I experienced this about 6 months ago. And I was in a meeting with a client, and there was 3 people in this meeting, right? And this one guy who I knew was very difficult to work with was being extremely aggressive, not inappropriate, was just being kind of like unnecessarily pushy in this meeting with these other 2 people. And my role as a consultant is kind of to be there and to guide and to provide input, is not to direct the meeting. That was the goal of this particular meeting. So, but I felt this urgency to tell this dude, like, how dare you treat your colleagues like this? Like, this is completely inappropriate. But what I did was, the little bit of my brain said, okay, Jono, this is an awkward, uncomfortable situation. What do we want the outcome to be? Well, we first of all want to help that person to realize that that's not a productive way, an effective way of communicating with the team. And then we also want to achieve the results that we set out for in the meeting. And also I want to make sure that the other 2 people feel supported, right? So what I did is I basically said, look, as an outsider, I think we maybe, there's some tension here in the room. And I think we might want to explore what's the underlying cause of the tension instead of kind of getting at each other. And everybody agreed. And then what we got down to was that it was essentially a set of misplaced expectations is what was causing that. So we had ultimately a fairly a fairly polite and productive session. And then afterwards, I reached out to the aggressive guy in question, and I just reached out to him privately. And I said, look, do you mind hopping on a quick call? And I shared some concerns and said, look, you seem like a nice guy, but I'm worried that the approach that you took here is not going to get you what you want, because people just don't respond very well to that kind of aggression. And he didn't realize he was behaving that way, and he apologized. And he actually went and apologized to the folks about it. But it was better for me to talk to him privately than to humiliate him in front of the other group, because it would have been very easy for me to say, look, how dare you speak to everybody like this? This is just completely uncool. But that wouldn't have accomplished the most favorable outcome, okay? And that's what being stoic is all about. So there's a couple of books I'd recommend you read about this. One is called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, an amazing book. I thought it was one of those bullshit self-help books for many years. It isn't. It's a really, really good book. Definitely recommend it. The second is called The Obstacle is the Way. This is by Ryan Holiday. I've mentioned this a bunch of times in my videos. If you're going through a tough time, this is an amazing book to read. I actually have a stack of them back there that I send out to people when they're going through difficult times. It's just tonic for the soul, right? It's not some foo-foo self-help nonsense. This is all about really understanding that in every obstacle, there's an opportunity for us to improve, for us to get better. And then the third one is the Daily Stoic. And this is essentially kind of, they call them a meditation, but it's basically, it's a life lesson every day that you can take a look at. And this is just a really great place to kind of like, keep growing that muscle, keep getting stronger at that stoic approach, okay? So there we have it. I hope that was useful. My goal in this video, like I say, was to kind of spin through the topic of stress and burnout, share some practical recommendations and a couple of books, of course. If you like these kinds of videos, be sure to share, your feedback in the comments. Always, give it a bit of a like, and then of course, hit that subscribe button and tap that little notification bell to stay up to date. And I'll see you soon. Bye.